The day the aliens came, humanity thought everything would change for the better. They were wrong. It was the year 2247 when the first ships appeared in Earth's sky. They were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Huge vessels that blocked the sun and made every human feel very small. The aliens called themselves and they said they came in peace. Admiral Park was just a boy when this happened. He remembered watching the news with his grandfather, who was one of the first humans to meet the aliens face to face. His grandfather wore his best suit and practiced his speech for weeks. He wanted to show the galaxy that humans were worthy of respect. The Galactic Assembly was made of 12 powerful species. There were the leaders, tall creatures with skin you could almost see through. Next to them were the who looked like walking mountains with 4 arms. There were smaller but fierce, with sharp teeth and even sharper tempers. All of them had traveled among the stars for thousands of years. All of them looked at humans the way a person might look at a bug. His grandfather stood in the great hall of the assembly and spoke about human dreams. He talked about their music, their art, their hope for the future. He asked for friendship and partnership among the stars. The aliens laughed at him. Not quiet laughter hidden behind hands. They laughed out loud, pointing at the human delegation like they were watching a comedy show. The high speaker called humans cute and amusing. He said watching them try to be important was like watching Bobbies reach for things they could never have. They gave humanity one planet, just one. It was called Telos 7, a cold and empty world at the edge of the galaxy where nobody else wanted to live. Humans were told to stay there and be grateful. They were forbidden from building real weapons. They had to pay tribute in precious metals every year, and they had to accept that they would never be equals. That was 300 years ago. Now Admiral Park stood on the bridge of a ship called the Defiance. He was an old man with gray hair and tired eyes, but his back was still straight, and his mind was still sharp. Beside him stood Lieutenant Commander, a woman half his age with a face that rarely showed emotion. "Sir, the latest report from Ambassador," she said, handing him a tablet. Read it slowly. His hands did not shake, but something dark grew in his eyes. They struck him. "Yes, sir." A delegate hit him across the face during the negotiations. The assembly said it was allowed because of cultural differences. "And our petition for mining rights on our own moons." Again. Put down the tablet. Through the window he could see Earth floating in the blackness of space. So beautiful, so fragile. For 3 centuries, his people had lived under the boot of aliens who saw them as nothing. Every generation hoped things would get better. Every generation was disappointed. Deep in the ship, Chief Engineer worked on machines the assembly did not know existed. She was a small woman with oil-stained hands and eyes that saw solutions where others saw only problems. Her grandmother had also been an engineer, and her grandmother before that. 4 generations of her family had worked in secret, building things that humans were not supposed to build. The assembly thought humans were stupid. They thought humans spent their time farming and fighting among themselves. They never imagined that every insult, every humiliation, every slap across the face had been remembered. They never imagined that humans were waiting. Walked to the lower decks to visit. The hallway was narrow and smelled of metal and electricity. When he entered her workshop, she looked up and almost smiled. "Admiral, come to check on our little project." "How close are we?" Wiped her hands on a rag. "The new weapons are ready. The shields are twice as strong as anything they have. Our engines are faster, our sensors are sharper, and our ships are tougher." She paused. "We have been preparing for this moment for a very long time." Nodded slowly. "My grandfather died believing humans would earn respect through peace. My father died still believing. I watched my daughter grow up being told she was worthless because of what species she belonged to. And now I am tired of watching my people suffer." Back on the bridge, was reading more reports. Human traders cheated out of their goods. Human scientists access to knowledge that other species shared freely. Human children taught in schools that they would never matter, that their dreams were too big for creatures so small. She had joined the military because she wanted to protect people. For years, she thought that meant keeping peace. Now she understood that sometimes protection required something else entirely. A message came through from Outpost Sierra 4, a small mining station far from Earth. The voice was scared and urgent. "This is Station Commander O. Warships have arrived. They are ordering us to leave. They say they have rights to this asteroid field now. We have 3,000 people here, including families. We have nowhere to go. Please, someone help us." Admiral listened to the message 3 times. Then he gave an order that would change the galaxy forever. "Set course for Sierra 4, maximum speed." The Defiance turned toward the stars, carrying with it 300 years of anger, 300 years of patience, and the beginning of the end for those who thought humans would stay quiet forever. The time for humiliation was over. The time for humanity had begun. The Defiance arrived too late. Admiral Park stepped off the transport ship and felt his boots crunch on broken metal. The air smelled wrong. It smelled like burning and death and things that should never be burned. Around him, the ruins of Outpost Sierra 4 stretched in every direction like the skeleton of a giant beast. Captain Shin walked beside him, holding a scanner that beeped softly as it counted the dead. He was a young man, barely 30, with the kind of face that usually smiled easily. He was not smiling now. "They did not wait for them to leave," said quietly. "They started firing while families were still packing their things." "How many?" 2,412 confirmed dead, stopped walking. "Admiral, there was a school here, a children's school." Did not answer. He walked toward what remained of a building with colorful walls and small chairs scattered among the wreckage. Drawings made by children were burned and torn, but he could still see what they had been. Pictures of spaceships, pictures of families, pictures of a future that would never come. Sergeant Iam knelt beside a small shape covered with a gray blanket. She was a soldier who had fought in many small battles and kept order on many troubled worlds. Her hands had held weapons since she was old enough to carry them. Now those hands were shaking as she touched the blanket gently. "She was holding a toy," said without looking up. "When we found her, she was still holding a toy." Nobody spoke. There was nothing to say. Contacted from the Defiance. Her voice was steady but cold. "Admiral, Earth is calling an emergency session. Every leader, every council member, every representative. They want to know what happened." "Tell them to watch the footage," said. "Tell them to see what our enemies did to children." The session was the largest in human history. Leaders from every colony, every station, every ship gathered together through video links that connected across the stars. They watched the recordings from Sierra 4. They saw the ships open fire on a civilian station. They heard the screams. They saw the bodies. When the footage ended, there was silence. Ambassador stood before Earth's United Council. He was an old man with a scar on his face where the delegate had struck him. He had spent his whole life trying to make peace with species who wanted no peace. He had believed that patience would eventually bring change. Now he stood straight and spoke clearly. "For 300 years we have done everything they asked. We stayed in our small corner of the galaxy. We paid their tributes. We accepted their insults. We hoped that one day they would see us as equals." He paused and looked at the faces watching him. "Sierra 4 is their answer. They killed our children and called it acceptable. They murdered families and claimed the right to do so. They see us as animals, as pests, as things to be removed when we become inconvenient." Turned to face the screen that would broadcast his words to the entire galaxy. "I have one question for this council. How much more must we lose before we stop asking for respect and start demanding it?" The vote was unanimous. For the first time in human history, every single leader agreed on the same thing: war. Across human space, something amazing happened. Shipyards that everyone thought were building mining vessels opened their doors. From inside came warships. Real warships, built in secret over generations. The Defiance was not alone anymore. It had brothers and sisters, hundreds of vessels designed for one purpose only. The heard about the vote and laughed just like they always laughed. They sent their third fleet to punish humanity for daring to stand up. 50 warships carrying thousands of soldiers, led by Commander, who had personally ordered the attack on Sierra 4. Commander sent a message to the human fleet. Surrender now and we will make your deaths quick. Fight and we will make you suffer like the insects you are. Admiral read the message on his bridge. Around him, his crew waited in silence. Chief Engineer stood ready at her station, her fingers dancing over controls that would unleash weapons that had never imagined. Smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had waited a very long time for this moment. Send a reply, he said. Tell them we choose to fight. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, not a single ship remained. The third fleet that had terrorized human colonies for decades was scattered wreckage floating in space. Commander's flagship was the last to fall, its bridge destroyed by weapons that should not have existed. Stood on his bridge and watched the debris drift past his window. Somewhere in that mess was the creature who had ordered the death of children. Somewhere in that mess was a message that the galaxy would soon receive. Broke the silence. Sir, the Assembly is demanding to know what happened. They want an explanation. Let them wonder, said, let them fear. News traveled fast across the stars. The species who had mocked humanity for centuries learned something new that day. They learned that patience was not weakness. They learned that silence was not acceptance. They learned that the quiet creatures from Earth had been preparing for this moment since the first day they were laughed at. And they learned to be afraid. The galaxy had never watched humans fight. They had watched humans bow. They had watched humans apologize. They had watched humans accept every insult with quiet faces and sad eyes. The alien species believed that humans were simply too weak to fight back. They were about to learn how wrong they were. After the third fleet disappeared, the Galactic Assembly panicked. 6 species came together and built the largest fleet seen in 100 years. 200 warships gathered at Prime, a fortress world near the heart of space. The High Speaker himself gave a speech promising to crush the human rebellion in a single battle. They are primitives, he told his commanders. They got lucky once, it will not happen again. Admiral Park had a different opinion. The human fleet arrived at Prime on a cold morning by Earth's calendar. 150 ships against 200. The numbers looked bad. The aliens believed the numbers meant victory. On the bridge of the Defiance, watched the enemy formation on her screen. They are using the classic formation. Heavy ships in the center, light ships on the wings. Just like we expected, said calmly, and the second line, waiting to hit our flanks when we engage the center. Chief Engineer spoke from her station. Admiral, I have studied their ships for 30 years. Every system, every weakness, every blind spot. They never changed anything because they never needed to. They fought the same way for 1,000 years. And we allowed herself a small smile. We changed everything. The battle began with a surprise. Instead of attacking the center like the Assembly expected, human ships split into small groups and hit the flanks from 5 directions at once. The aliens had never seen tactics like this. Their communications became confused. Their formations broke apart. Captain Shin led the assault wing against the second line. His ships were smaller and faster than the giant vessels. They danced between the enemy like birds around elephants, striking weak points and disappearing before they could respond. They cannot hit what they cannot catch, reported to the admiral. Their weapons are powerful but slow. We are faster. On the ground, Sergeant IM waited in a transport ship with 200 soldiers. They were heading for the orbital station above Prime, a massive structure that controlled the planet's defenses. Taking it would end the battle quickly. Checked her weapon and looked at her soldiers. Many of them were young. Some had lost family at Sierra 4. All of them had grown up being told they were worthless. "Remember what they did to our people," she said quietly. "Remember the children. Today we show them what humans really are." The transport crashed through the station's docking bay under heavy fire, was first out the door, moving with speed that surprised the defenders. They expected humans to be clumsy, slow, easy to kill. They had never faced humans who had trained in secret for decades. The soldiers were tall and graceful, but they relied too much on their technology. Once team destroyed their shield generators, they fell apart. Human soldiers moved through the station like water, adapting to every situation, covering each other, fighting as one unit. In space, the battle reached its peak. The assembly flagship, Eternal Supremacy, was the largest warship in the galaxy. It had never lost a battle. Its commander believed it was unbeatable. Admiral watched his tactical screen as Captain's wing began a dangerous approach. "Are you sure about this?" "I grew up on stories of Sierra 4, Admiral. I watched the footage when I was 12 years old. I have been sure about this my whole life." Ships attacked the Eternal Supremacy from below, where the shields were weakest. It was a tiny flaw, discovered by human spies who had served on ships for generations. The aliens had never fixed it because they never believed anyone would find it. 3 human ships died in the assault, but their weapons found their target. The Eternal Supremacy exploded in a flower of fire and metal, and with it died the myth that the assembly could not be defeated. The coalition fleet broke. Ships that had mocked human technology ran away from ships built by workers who remembered every insult. Commanders who had laughed at human generals now begged for mercy. On the orbital station stood over the last defender. He was wounded and afraid, so different from the proud creatures who had dismissed humanity for centuries. "Please," he whispered, "we surrender, show mercy." Thought about the toy that little girl had been holding. She thought about the drawings of spaceships on burned walls. She thought about 300 years of being called inferior. "Mercy," she repeated softly. "Did you show mercy at Sierra 4? She did not kill him. Instead, she put him in restraints and moved on, because she was human, because being better than them was the whole point. But she did not forget. None of them did. When the Battle of Prime ended, the galaxy understood something new. Humans had not won because of luck. They had won because they had studied their enemies while being ignored. They had prepared while being mocked. They had grown strong while being called weak. And now they would not stop until the old order was burned to ash. The Galactic Assembly had ruled the stars for thousands of years. They had faced rebellions before. They had crushed empires, absorbed civilizations, and broken the spirit of countless species. They always won because they could always find a way to make their enemies stop fighting. Humanity refused to stop. After Prime, the Assembly tried to buy peace. They offered humans 3 new colony worlds. They offered to reduce the tribute payments. They offered seats on minor councils and access to restricted technology. Ambassador listened to their offers in a room full of diplomats. They smiled at him the way adults smile at angry children. They believed humans would accept any deal that gave them something. "You offer us scraps," said, "and expect us to be grateful. You killed our children and now offer us planets. There is no trade that balances that equation." "Then what do you want?" the diplomat asked, confused. "We want you to understand what you created. You had 3 centuries to treat us fairly. You chose to mock us instead. Now you will face what your cruelty built." The fell first. General led the ground forces. She was a woman who spoke rarely and never raised her voice, but every soldier under her command would walk through fire if she asked. She had lost her younger brother at Sierra 4. He had been a teacher at the children's school. There were proud warriors, four-armed giants who believed strength was everything. They expected a hard fight. They got something worse. Human ships appeared around their world like ghosts, jamming their communications, disabling their defense satellites. When the fleet tried to respond, it found itself fighting blind. Human vessels struck and vanished, never where they expected. "How are they doing this?" the commander screamed at his officers. "They are primitives." But humans were not primitives. They were the species that had spent 300 years watching, learning, and preparing. They knew psychology better than they knew themselves. They knew that pride would make the fight even when fighting was foolish. They used that pride like a weapon. When General marched through the capital, the defenders had already surrendered. Their spirit was broken. The giants who had struck Ambassador now bowed their heads as human soldiers walked past. "They want exemptions," her aide reported. "They say our occupation rules humiliate them." Did not smile, but something cold passed through her eyes. "Document their request. File it with the records of how they treated our people. Then tell them no." They fought harder. They were a warrior species who believed death in battle was honorable. They would not surrender they would fight until the last soldier fell. Admiral respected this in a strange way. He gave them the war they wanted. Chief Engineer had designed a special weapon for their species had powerful hearing, much better than humans, had built sonic disruptors that targeted this advantage. The devices caused no permanent damage, but the pain was worse than anything they had ever felt. When human forces attacked positions, they activated the disruptors first. Soldiers fell to the ground, screaming, unable to hold their weapons. Human troops walked through their defenses like they were not even there. The war lasted 3 weeks. It ended with their high general kneeling before Captain Shin, tears running down his fierce face. "We are warriors," the general said. "We expected to die fighting this. This is worse." Looked at him without sympathy. "You attacked a mining station full of families. You killed children holding toys. You do not deserve a warrior's death." They watched their allies fall and realized they were alone. High Speaker the Magnificent, who had laughed at humanity's first diplomats, now sent messages of peace every day. He spoke of reconciliation, of moving forward together, of healing old wounds. Ambassador answered him personally. "For 300 years we tried peace. You answered with contempt. Now you ask for peace because you are losing. We are not interested in your convenience. We are interested in justice." "What must we do?" asked desperation in his voice. "Surrender completely, without conditions." The broadcast of surrender was watched across the galaxy. The proud leader, who had called humans insects, bowed before Ambassador in the great hall of the assembly. The same hall where humans had been laughed at. The same hall where grandfather had asked for respect and received mockery. "You built your power on our humiliation," said to the watching galaxy. "You believed kindness was weakness and patience was fear. You were wrong. We were simply better than you. We waited because we hoped you would change. You did not change. You forced us to become what we never wanted to be." He paused and looked directly at warriors. The old order collapsed like a building with broken foundations. Species that had dominated the galaxy found themselves answering to creatures they had dismissed as worthless. The assembly that had seemed eternal was gone in less than a year. And humanity stood in its place, deciding what kind of galaxy they would build. 1 year after the war ended, the galaxy looked very different. The old assembly was gone. In its place stood something new, something that had never existed before. Admiral Park stood in a chamber that had been completely rebuilt. No species sat higher than another. No race had more power simply because they were older or stronger. Every voice mattered equally. The representative looked at with eyes full of confusion. "You could rule everything," he said. "Your fleet is the strongest. Your weapons are the best. Why share power with those you defeated?" Thought about this question. He had asked himself the same thing many times during the long nights after the war. Captain Shin had argued for harsh terms. Sergeant Im had wanted them to suffer as humans had suffered. Even General, usually so calm, had moments when she wanted revenge. But remembered something his grandfather had told him before he died. "Power is easy," the old man had said. "Any fool can take power. The hard part is using it wisely." "We share power," answered because we remember what it felt like to have none. We know what your assembly became when it had no limits. We will not make the same mistake." Admiral now led the fleet that kept peace across the galaxy. She was harder than she had been before the war, but something in her eyes had also grown softer. She understood now that strength without wisdom was just another form of cruelty. "They are adjusting slowly," she reported at the first council meeting. "They still believe in strength above all things, but their children are learning different lessons. Give them time." "And asked Ambassador, who now served as humanity's permanent representative. "They are angry, they feel humiliated, but they are following the rules. Some of their younger leaders actually seem to appreciate the fairness of the new system." Paused. "They never had fairness before. It is strange to them." Chief Engineer had been offered important positions on dozens of worlds. Everyone wanted the genius who had built the weapons that changed history. She refused them all. Instead, she returned to her workshop on Earth and started building again. But she was not building weapons anymore. Her apprentice, a young woman named Bay, watched her work on a new kind of ship. It was designed to make dead worlds alive again, to fix the damage that centuries of assembly exploitation had caused, to give back instead of take. "Why?" asked one evening. "After everything they did to us, why help them?" Looked up from her work. Her hands were still stained with oil just like always. Her eyes were still sharp and clever, but there was something peaceful in her face now. "Because being better than them was always the point," she said. "The war proved we could fight. Now we prove we can heal. That is what makes us human." General visited Sierra 4 before returning to active duty. The ruins had been cleared away, and a memorial stood where the children's school had been. The monument was simple, just a wall of stone with names carved into it. Every person who had died that day was remembered. Placed her hand on the cold surface and closed her eyes. Her brother's name was there, among the teachers. She had promised herself she would come here when the war was over. She had promised she would tell him what happened. "We won," she whispered. "We won everything, but we did not become monsters. We stayed human, even when it would have been easier to be cruel. I hope you would be proud." A sound made her turn. A group of children were approaching the memorial with their teacher. They were on an educational trip, learning about the war that had changed their world. Some of them looked scared. They knew their species had done terrible things. Watched them for a moment. Then she walked over and knelt down to meet their eyes. "You are not responsible for what your ancestors did," she said gently. "But you are responsible for what happens next. Do you understand?" The children nodded slowly. Their teacher bowed with respect that the old assembly never showed to humans. Back in the council chamber, Ambassador prepared to give the closing speech of the first session. He was old now, his hair white and his body tired, but his voice was still strong and his words carried across the galaxy. 3 centuries ago, you welcomed us with laughter. You told us we were small and weak and would never matter. Today, we welcome you to a new era with something different." He looked around the chamber at faces from every species that had once dismissed humanity. "We offer you respect. Not because you earned it through kindness, but because we choose to be what you never were. We choose to build instead of destroy. We choose to lift up instead of push down. We choose to remember our pain without passing it to others." He smiled, and for the first time in his long life, there was no bitterness in it. We are humanity. We endured your contempt. We survived your cruelty. We fought back when you gave us no choice, and now we have built something better than anything you imagined. He spread his hands to include the whole chamber, the whole galaxy, the whole future that waited ahead. We built a place where every species is equal, where power is shared, where children of all kinds can grow up believing they matter. You called us weak for wanting this, but we were never weak. We were simply patient enough to wait for the day when we could make it real. The session ended. The new Galactic Council would face many challenges ahead. Old hatreds would take generations to heal. Some species would resist the changes. Some wounds would never fully close. But as Admiral Park walked out of the chamber and looked up at the stars, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Hope. The stars that had once seemed cold and unwelcoming now felt like they were waiting for a galaxy that had learned, finally, that the quiet ones, the patient ones, the ones who dreamed of peace even while preparing for war, were the strongest of all. Humanity had been mocked for centuries. They had run out of tolerance and war had come. But in the end, they had built something better from the ashes of the old order. They had built a future worthy of the children of Sierra 4.